Old and useless. Her voice rang out like a whip in the quiet dining room, each word slicing through the air with cruel precision. My daughter-in-law Ashley sat across from me with a smug grin, twirling her wine glass, as if she had just said something witty. The table went silent. My son Mark stared down at his plate, pretending to be engrossed in the potatoes he hadn't touched. My grandson looked up, confused, sensing tension, but not fully understanding the weight of those words. I forced a small smile, my fingers curling slightly in my lap. After 70 years of life, 50 of them spent working hard, raising a family, and surviving more losses than I care to count, I thought I was past the point of being humiliated. But in that moment, the sting of her mockery burned deeper than I expected. "Careful, Ashley," I said softly, keeping my voice even. "Old doesn't mean useless." She laughed, tossing her hair. "Oh, come on, Celeste. Don't be so serious." I was just joking. But her eyes told me it wasn't a joke. It was a statement, her declaration that in her eyes I was a relic of the past, someone to be pitied, dismissed, and eventually forgotten. I looked at my son, searching for even a flicker of defense on my behalf. Nothing. Just silence. It was almost worse than Ashley's words. Dinner continued, but I barely tasted the food. My mind was elsewhere, back to the nights I stayed up baking bread and pastries at my tiny bakery, while Mark was a boy, back when we barely had enough money to pay rent. My hands, now speckled with age spots, had once kneaded dough for hours so my son could have a future. Ashley's voice brought me back. "Maybe you should sell your house, Celeste. You don't need that big place anymore. You could move into a little apartment somewhere easier to manage. It would free up so much money for better things." Better things. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her intent. She wasn't suggesting this for my benefit. She saw my home as a resource, a piece of property that in her mind was already hers to claim. I placed my fork down slowly. "I appreciate your concern," I said with a faint smile, the kind that revealed nothing, "but I'm quite comfortable where I am." Her smirk faltered slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to push back even mildly. After dinner, as I walked to my car under the cool night sky, I felt the sting of humiliation mixing with something far more powerful. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was disappointed deeply, so in both Ashley and my son. But beneath that disappointment, a thought began to form, quiet and steady. She thinks I'm powerless. She thinks I'm done. She couldn't be more wrong. When I got home, I stood in the entryway of my house, gazing around at the photographs of my late husband, my son as a boy, my bakery during its bustling years. This home held decades of stories, stories that Ashley clearly thought meant nothing. But she didn't know me. She didn't know that the woman she just mocked had spent decades not just raising a child and running a business, but also quietly building a safety net, one that no one in the family knew existed. My bakery may have been small, but I had been smart with money. Real estate investments, savings bonds, stocks purchased years ago when everyone thought I was just a baker. I ran my hand along the banister of the staircase, feeling the familiar smoothness of the wood. Ashley might see me as old, but I still had control over my life, my choices, and yes, my money. That night, I sat at my old oak desk and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were records, savings accounts, property deeds, stock portfolios, things Ashley had no idea existed. As I leafed through them, a calmness settled over me. She wanted me to sell my house and hand over my future on a silver platter. No, I might be 70. My joints might ache some days. My hair might be streaked with gray. But old and useless. Not even close. I closed the folder and locked it away again, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Let her laugh. One day she would learn just how wrong she was, and when that day came, she wouldn't be laughing anymore. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the memories came rushing back. They weren't just memories of pain, they were memories of survival. I could still see myself at 22, newly married, standing in the cramped kitchen of our first apartment, with flour on my face, baking bread to sell at the farmer's market because my husband Thomas had just lost his job. We didn't have much, but I had determination. I turned that tiny side hustle into a bakery, a modest little shop with chipped counters and the smell of fresh bread wafting out the door every morning. Mark practically grew up in that bakery. He used to sit on a flour sack in the corner, legs swinging while I worked the dough. Every coin we made, I saved something aside. At first, it was only pennies and dimes, but over time, as the bakery became more successful, I invested. I didn't tell anyone Thomas knew, of course, but even he never realized just how careful I had been with every dollar. When Thomas got sick, I paid the bills without asking for help. I took on extra shifts, made custom cakes late into the night, and still saved what I could. Even as I watched him fade, I kept going, because I knew life wouldn't stop. The bakery was sold years ago, but those decades of work left me with more than enough to live comfortably, more than Ashley could ever imagine. But sitting there in that moment, thinking of how she dismissed me, I realized something bitterly ironic. The life I built through sweat and sacrifice had given her the very comfort that allowed her to look down on me. The next morning, I decided to visit the bakery's old location. It wasn't mine anymore. Some cafe had taken its place, but walking by, smelling the faint aroma of coffee and pastries, I felt a pang of nostalgia. The bricks were the same, the windows slightly bigger now, but the ghosts of my past lingered in every corner. An old regular, Mrs. Dawkins, spotted me from across the street. "Celeste, my goodness, it's been ages," she called out. We hugged, and she told me how much she missed my cinnamon rolls. We stood there for a while, chatting about the old days, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like me again. The woman people respected. The woman who mattered. As I walked back to my car, I realized something important. Ashley's opinion of me didn't define me, but what hurt wasn't just her cruelty. It was my son's silence. When I got home, I took out my journal. I hadn't written in it for years, but the words came easily now. I poured out everything I felt: anger, sadness, disappointment. Writing it down didn't make the pain go away, but it gave it shape. And then a thought hit me like a spark in the dark. Ashley thought I was irrelevant. Mark stayed quiet. Maybe they both assumed that one day my house, my savings, everything would naturally fall into their hands. I closed the journal slowly, my fingers resting on the leather cover. They didn't know the truth. I still had power. I still had choices. And if Ashley wanted to laugh at me, then someday she would learn exactly who she was underestimating. The next weekend, I attended a community brunch. Ashley was there too, of course, holding court at a table full of young wives. She was bragging about their new business venture, some online boutique she and her friends had started. "Celeste," she called out with a smile far too bright. "You'll come support us, won't you? You're retired. You have all this time on your hands." A few of the women laughed politely. I just smiled. "Of course, dear. I'd be happy to take a look." Inside, though, my resolve only grew stronger. She didn't know it yet, but the game was already changing. A few days later, the community center hosted a charity luncheon. I almost didn't go. Events like that had always felt a bit exhausting, but something in me wanted to be there. Maybe I wanted to remind myself that I was more than just the woman Ashley thought she could ridicule. The room buzzed with conversation and clinking cutlery. I spotted Ashley immediately: perfect hair, perfect smile weaving through the tables like she owned the place. I tried to keep to myself, sitting near the end of one table enjoying my tea. Then it happened. "Oh, Celeste, I didn't see you there," Ashley said in a voice just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You look lovely. Did you come alone?" There was a slight pause in her tone, the kind that hinted at condescension. I could feel several heads turn toward me. "Yes, Ashley," I said evenly. "I'm here to support the cause as always." "Oh, that's so sweet," she said, her lips curling into a half smile. "I suppose it must be nice to have all this free time now that you're, well, retired and all. No one really depends on you anymore, right?" The words landed heavy. The women around the table chuckled softly, more out of awkwardness than humor. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my composure. "It is nice," I replied calmly, taking a sip of my tea. "It gives me time to decide exactly who deserves my help and who doesn't." The room fell quiet for just a second. Ashley's smirk faltered, though she quickly recovered with a laugh. "Of course, Celeste," she said, brushing off my words. But I could see it, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her confidence wavered for just a moment. After that, I excused myself walking outside to get some air. I stood by the fountain in the courtyard, listening to the water trickle softly. Inside, the humiliation burned deeper than I wanted to admit. But this time, I felt something different too, an awakening of sorts. Ashley didn't just disrespect me, she genuinely believed I had no value anymore. She had no idea that the old woman she mocked was the same person who had built a life brick by brick, dollar by dollar, without anyone handing her a thing. As I watched the sunlight dance across the water, I thought of Thomas. He used to tell me, Celeste, the strongest people are the ones who don't have to shout to prove their worth. He was right. That afternoon when I returned home, I pulled out the leather folder again. I spent hours reviewing everything: my savings accounts, the modest rental property I owned in town, the portfolio of stocks that had grown quietly over the years. Ashley didn't know it, but I wasn't just comfortable. I was secure far more than she could imagine. And I realized something powerful. I didn't need to defend myself with words. I just needed to wait. Because life has a way of humbling people like Ashley. And when that moment came, I would be ready, not with anger, but with quiet, undeniable strength. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, I stared out at the quiet street. The neighborhood was still the same houses, the same trees swaying gently in the wind, but inside me, something had shifted. I had always been the kind of woman who let things slide. I believed that dignity meant staying silent in the face of cruelty. But now, as Ashley's words replayed in my mind, I realized silence had been my shield and perhaps my prison. Thomas had always admired my resilience. "You're steady, Celeste," he used to say, "like a rock people can lean on." I smiled at the memory, but it was tinged with a sharp ache. Thomas had passed almost 10 years ago, and though the loneliness never fully went away, I had managed. I paid my bills, maintained my home, and even tutored kids for extra purpose in my life. I wasn't weak, but I had allowed Ashley to believe that I was. The next morning, I decided to test something. I called Mark. "Hi, sweetheart," I said when he answered. "I was wondering if you and Ashley could come by for dinner this weekend. Just something simple at my place." He hesitated for a moment. Sure, Mom. We'll be there." When Saturday came, I cooked one of Mark's favorites, roast chicken with rosemary and lemon. The house smelled warm and comforting, just like it used to when Thomas was alive. Ashley arrived looking perfect as always. Her eyes swept over the house, and I could see the faint flicker of something: possessiveness. Ambition. Dinner started pleasantly enough, but soon Ashley brought it up again. "You know, Celeste," she said between bites, "Mark and I were just talking the other day. This house must be a lot to take care of all by yourself. Wouldn't it be better to downsize? You'd have so much extra money, and you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or taxes." Mark stayed quiet, fiddling with his fork. I smiled and cut a piece of chicken. "That's kind of you to think of me," I said gently. "But I've made my decision. This house is my home and I intend to stay." Ashley tilted her head, feigning concern. Of course. We just, we care about you. We'd hate to see you struggle in the future." Struggle. The word echoed in my mind, absurd and almost laughable. She had no idea that I was far from struggling. After dinner, as they left, Ashley leaned in with a sweet smile. "If you ever need help with your finances, you know where to find me." I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. That was the moment I decided. I would no longer just endure Ashley's condescension. I wouldn't confront her with words, but with reality. Because I knew something she didn't. Her perfect little world wasn't as stable as she made it seem. The boutique she bragged about, it was a financial sinkhole. I had overheard enough at the luncheon to know they were in trouble. Creditors were circling and investors were pulling out. Ashley thought she was untouchable. But life, I realized, has a way of reminding people exactly where they stand. And when the day came that she needed me, really needed me, I would be there, calm, smiling, and in complete control. The following week, I woke up earlier than usual. Something about having a plan, an unspoken resolve, gave me energy I hadn't felt in years. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and opened my laptop. It had been a while since I'd checked my accounts in detail, but the numbers reassured me. My savings were substantial. The rental house in town was fully paid off, bringing in steady income each month. My stock portfolio, carefully built over decades, had grown more than I'd expected. I chuckled softly to myself. If Ashley ever knew just how much I had quietly built, she would choke on her arrogance. I decided to meet with my financial advisor, someone I trusted deeply, to ensure everything was structured exactly how I wanted. We went over my will, my accounts, and even discussed creating a trust, something that would give me even greater control over my assets. When I left the office that day, I felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting to life, I was shaping it. A few days later, I bumped into Ashley at the grocery store. She was dressed impeccably as always, but there was a tightness to her smile. "Celeste, what a surprise," she said, forcing a brightness in her voice. "How are you?" "I'm wonderful, dear," I replied, matching her tone. "Just running a few errands." She hesitated before speaking again. "You know, Mark and I have been so busy with the boutique lately. Things are, well, you know how business can be. Some months are just harder than others." I nodded. "Yes, I know that all too well. Running a small business is never easy." Her eyes lit up as if I had opened the door she wanted. "Exactly. You know, you've always been so good with finances. Maybe you could take a look at our business plan sometime. We're trying to secure a loan, but the banks can be so stubborn." Ah, there it was. I smiled kindly. "I'd be happy to give you some advice when I have time. But loans, well, banks do tend to look very carefully at financial records, don't they?" Ashley's smile faltered just slightly. Later that night, I received a call from Mark. His voice was hesitant, almost sheepish. "Mom," he began, "Ashley was wondering well, if you could help us out. Just temporarily. The boutique is going through a rough patch, and we could really use some extra support." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath, letting silence stretch just enough to make him uncomfortable. "Mark," I said softly, "I'll think about it. But tell me, why didn't Ashley ask me herself?" He didn't answer right away. She just didn't want to seem pushy." I smiled to myself. Oh, how the tables were beginning to turn. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal again. "The woman who laughed at me is starting to sweat." But this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about power, the quiet, undeniable kind that comes from knowing the truth. I didn't need them. They needed me. 2 weeks later, the call finally came, the one I had been expecting. "Celeste, hi." Ashley's voice was too cheerful, too high-pitched. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, dear. What can I do for you?" I asked, my tone warm but neutral. There was a pause, then a sigh. "Well, I was wondering if we could come over. Mark and we need to talk to you about something important." When they arrived that evening, Ashley's confidence was noticeably dimmed. Her makeup was flawless as always, but her eyes darted nervously around my living room. Mark sat stiffly beside her on the couch, his hands clasped. "Mom," he started, "things haven't been going well with the boutique. We've fallen behind on a few payments, and the bank, well, they're threatening to call in the loan." Ashley jumped in. "It's just a temporary setback. We're so close to making it big, we just need a little help. A small loan to get us through this rough patch." I sat in my armchair across from them, hands folded neatly in my lap. "And how much?" I asked gently, "is a small loan?" Ashley hesitated before saying it. $50,000. I almost laughed. Instead, I tilted my head slightly. "That's not a small amount, dear." She forced a smile. "But you're so good with money. You've saved your whole life. I mean, you don't really have any big expenses now, right?" I looked at her calmly, letting her words hang in the air. "Ashley," I said softly, "do you remember what you told me at dinner a few weeks ago?" Her face paled slightly. "I don't remember exactly. You told me I was old and useless." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, she didn't mean." I held up a hand. "It's all right, Mark. I'm not upset. I just find it interesting. Because now it seems this old useless woman is the one you're coming to for help." Ashley's mouth opened, then closed. Her perfect composure cracked just slightly. "I'm not saying no," I continued. "But if I lend you this money, it won't be as a gift. It will be a proper loan with interest, a contract, and collateral." Ashley blinked, stunned. Contract, she repeated. Yes, I said simply. If I'm going to put my money at risk, I expect the same respect any bank would receive. You'll sign the paperwork, agree to terms, and provide something of value as collateral. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can't help. The room went silent. Mark looked at Ashley. Ashley looked at me. For the first time, I saw her pride falter completely. Ashley sat frozen for a long moment, her painted smile cracking like porcelain under pressure. The silence in the room stretched until Mark finally cleared his throat. Mom, are you serious about a contract? He asked, his voice quiet, almost pleading. I leaned back in my armchair, folding my hands neatly. Of course. If you want to borrow $50,000, it must be done properly. If you're confident about your boutique's success, then you should have no problem with signing a legal agreement. Ashley's jaw tightened, but she tried to recover her composure. Celeste, this is family. Do we really need to make it so formal? Yes, I said firmly, my tone still calm. Because family should treat each other with respect, and respect means accountability. If I simply hand over the money, what lesson do you learn? That I'm just a bank you can withdraw from. Mark lowered his eyes. She's right, Ashley, he muttered. Ashley shot him a sharp glance, but for once, Mark didn't back down. I'll contact my lawyer tomorrow. I continued, my voice steady. We'll draw up a contract with repayment terms, interest, let's say 3% annually, and collateral. That way, everything is clear and we all know where we stand. Ashley opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her pride was struggling to keep up with her desperation. Finally, she said, collateral. What could we possibly— Your car would be sufficient, I said smoothly. Or perhaps the equity in your boutique, whatever you prefer. Ashley's face flushed red. My car? That's absurd. I raised an eyebrow. If you think that's absurd, perhaps you don't need the money as badly as you say. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark sighed. Ashley, we don't have a choice. We need the money. If Mom's willing to help us, we have to agree to her terms. For the first time, I saw the shift in Ashley's demeanor. The arrogance was slipping, replaced by something unfamiliar to her humility. All right, she said. Finally, her voice clipped. We'll do it your way. Good, I replied softly, standing up. I'll arrange everything. Once the contract is signed and the collateral secured, I'll transfer the funds. Ashley gave a stiff nod, then stood as well. She tried to compose herself, but the defeat in her posture was impossible to hide. After they left, I sat alone in the quiet house, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the sheer power of the moment. For years, I had allowed Ashley's comments to slide past me. I had convinced myself that staying silent was the dignified thing to do, but dignity didn't mean allowing myself to be diminished. Tonight proved something important. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't irrelevant. And Ashley now understood, at least in part, that the woman she mocked was far stronger, far more independent than she had ever imagined. The next day, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Jenkins. We went over every detail of the loan agreement. I have to say, Celeste, he said with a faint smile, it's refreshing to see someone handle family matters with such clarity. Most people let emotions cloud their judgment. I've spent my whole life being sensible, I replied. Why stop now? By the time we were finished, everything was prepared. The contract, the repayment schedule, the interest terms, even the clause about collateral. When I handed Ashley the papers that weekend, she looked at me as if she barely recognized the woman standing before her. This feels so formal, she muttered, flipping through the pages. That's because it is, I said, with a faint smile. If you want to be treated like an adult capable of running a business, this is what adults do. They sign agreements. They take responsibility. Ashley hesitated, then signed her name, her hand shaking just slightly. I countersigned, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness that it had come to this, satisfaction that I had finally drawn a boundary that could not be crossed. As I handed her a copy of the contract, I looked her in the eye. You may think I'm old, Ashley, I said softly, but useless. No, never. She didn't respond. When they left that afternoon, I watched from the window as Ashley got into her car. Her back was stiff, her face pale. I didn't gloat. There was no need. Because this was never about revenge. It was about power, the quiet kind that didn't need shouting or theatrics. And as I stood there in the sunlight streaming through my window, I realized something profound. Sometimes the best way to teach someone respect isn't with anger, it's with strength they never saw coming. Over the next few weeks, Ashley's visits to my house became noticeably more frequent. But this time, she didn't come with smug remarks or condescending smiles. Instead, she came with papers, receipts, and nervous questions about how best to manage their finances. It was strange, almost surreal to see her humbled like this. She sat at my kitchen table, my table leaning forward as I explained basic budgeting concepts she clearly never cared to learn before. "Wait," she said one afternoon, frowning. "So, we should have been keeping detailed expense records for the boutique this whole time." "Yes," I replied calmly. "A business without records is like a house without a foundation. It may look pretty from the outside, but eventually it will crumble." She flushed, glancing at Mark. "We just thought we could manage as we went." I didn't say anything, just let the silence do its work. Mark looked exhausted, worn down by the financial stress and Ashley's mounting anxiety. For the first time, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He wasn't cruel, just weak. And perhaps my silence all these years had made him weaker still. One evening, after Ashley left in frustration, Mark stayed behind. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you that night at dinner. I should have said something." I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, you should have." He lowered his head. "I guess I just didn't want to fight with her. But now, I see what you've been dealing with." I softened slightly, reaching out to touch his hand. "Mark, you're my son. I love you. But being quiet when someone disrespects your own mother, it's not kindness. It's cowardice. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "I'll do better, Mom. I promise." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. Ashley, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her boutique's reputation in town was collapsing, late orders, unpaid suppliers, and whispered rumors about their mounting debts. Even her closest friends began to distance themselves, realizing that Ashley wasn't as successful as she pretended to be. I started hearing from people at the community center subtle comments about Ashley asking around for other loans, even trying to pawn off some of her jewelry. But every time she came back to me, "Celeste," she said one afternoon, her voice tight with frustration, "the contract says we have to start repayments in 3 months. I don't know if we'll be ready by then. Could we maybe extend it a bit?" I looked at her calmly. "Ashley, if you can't meet the terms, then you shouldn't have signed the contract. That's what responsibility means. You asked for help, and I gave it with conditions. I've held up my end. Now you hold up yours." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she swallowed it down. "All right," she said through clenched teeth. "We'll figure it out." Late that night, as I sat in my living room reading, I realized something remarkable. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. For so many years, I had believed my silence kept the peace. I thought enduring disrespect was easier than confronting it. But now, as I watched Ashley struggle under the weight of her own arrogance, I understood that my strength had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting. A week later, I attended another community brunch. This time, Ashley wasn't holding court at the center of attention. She sat quietly in the corner, avoiding eye contact with the women who used to adore her. "Mrs. Dawkins leaned over to me and whispered, 'It's funny how things change, isn't it? Ashley used to act like she ran this town. Now look at her.' I didn't respond. I simply sipped my tea, letting the world see for itself what kind of woman Ashley truly was. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's the quiet satisfaction of watching someone realize they've been standing on sand all along. It happened on a gray, rainy afternoon. I was in the middle of organizing some old photo albums when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Ashley standing on my porch, without her usual perfect hair or polished confidence. She looked small, her umbrella half broken from the wind rain soaking the hem of her designer coat. When I opened the door, she didn't smile. "Celeste," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside. She entered slowly, her eyes darting around as if she felt out of place in my modest but warm home. We sat at the kitchen table. I made her tea, but she just held the cup, not drinking. Finally, she spoke. I don't know what to do. We're out of money. Completely. The boutique. It's finished. The bank is taking legal action, and she swallowed hard. Mark's furious with me. We might lose the house. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air. Tears welled up in her eyes. I need your help. I know I've been awful to you. I know I said terrible things. But please, please, Celeste, I'm begging you. We need another loan. Her voice cracked on the last word. I studied her for a long moment. This wasn't the proud, mocking woman who once called me old and useless. This was a desperate, broken person facing the consequences of her own choices. Why should I help you, Ashley? I asked quietly. She lowered her head. Because you're better than me. You always have been. The admission surprised me. I folded my hands on the table. Ashley, the first loan I gave you wasn't out of pity. It was to give you a chance to prove you could take responsibility. But what happened? She wiped at her tears. I failed. I thought I knew better. I spent too much on appearances, on things that didn't matter. I didn't listen to anyone. And now you want me to save you again. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll do whatever you want. Sign anything? Give you anything as collateral. I don't know where else to turn. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. It would have been so easy to feel triumphant, to relish in her desperation. But I didn't, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about respect. I'll think about it, I said finally. But if I decide to help you again, Ashley, you must understand something. This is the last time. After this, you're on your own. She nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. Thank you. Thank you so much. I swear I'll never forget this. I gave her a faint smile. I hope so. After she left, I stood by the window watching her walk down the driveway through the rain. Thomas's words echoed in my mind. The strongest people don't need to shout to prove their worth. And he had been right all along. Ashley came to me humbled, not because I had demanded her respect, but because life had done it for me. That night, I wrote in my journal again. Maybe power isn't about control or dominance. Maybe it's about knowing you can help someone, choosing to do so, but never letting them forget how they treated you when they thought you had nothing. I closed the journal and felt a quiet sense of peace. Ashley's downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was remembering who I had always been. Strong, capable, and never ever useless. The following week, Ashley returned to my house, this time with Mark by her side. They both looked weary, as if the weight of their situation had finally stripped away every last ounce of pretense. Mom, Mark said softly, "We've gathered all the paperwork you asked for. The boutique is done. We're closing it." Ashley signed over her car as collateral, just like the contract says. "We'll pay you back every cent." I looked at the folder in Mark's hands. Inside were the documents. Title, transfer, bank statements, everything neatly arranged. For once, Ashley didn't speak. She stood there, hands clasped in front of her, eyes downcast. I motioned for them to sit. "This isn't easy for me either," I said, my voice even. I never wanted to be in this position with my own family. But sometimes lessons have to be learned the hard way. Ashley finally looked up, her eyes glassy. "Celeste, I know I've treated you terribly. I don't deserve your kindness. But I want you to know, I'm done pretending. I thought success was about looking important. I thought you were weak because you didn't show off. But you're the strongest woman I've ever met." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. I leaned forward, my hands folded. Ashley's strength isn't about appearances. It's about resilience, responsibility, and the humility to admit when you're wrong. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm not helping you again because I enjoy seeing you like this," I continued. "I'm doing it because I want you to finally understand that respect isn't a gift. It's something you earn. You mocked me when you thought I was powerless. But now you know the truth." Mark swallowed hard. "Mom, I'm sorry too. I should have stood up for you a long time ago." For a moment, the silence between us felt heavy, but not in the same way as before. It wasn't cold or hostile, just raw, unspoken truth settling into place. I signed the papers and handed them back. "You'll get the funds tomorrow. But remember, this is your final chance. Don't waste it." When they left, I sat alone in the quiet again, staring at the steam curling up from my untouched tea. For the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not in Ashley, not even in Mark, but in me. All this time, I had convinced myself that silence was strength, that allowing others to walk over me was the price of keeping the peace. But now I understood that true strength was drawing boundaries, even if it meant facing conflict. 2 weeks later, I attended another family dinner. The atmosphere was different, subdued, almost reverent. Ashley greeted me with a hug, her voice soft, her demeanor completely changed. "Celeste, thank you for coming," she said sincerely. I simply nodded and took my seat. As we ate, I noticed Ashley serving me first, asking if I wanted more wine, more potatoes. It was a small gesture, but meaningful. For the first time, she looked at me not as an inconvenience, not as someone to be dismissed, but as a person worthy of respect. At dessert, Ashley cleared her throat. "Celeste," she said quietly, "I just want to say thank you for everything. And I'm sorry, truly sorry." I studied her face. There was no smugness, no hidden malice, just honesty. "You're welcome, Ashley," I said softly, "and I accept your apology. But remember, words mean little without action. Show me through how you live, not just what you say." She nodded firmly. For the first time since Thomas passed, I felt like my family finally saw me, not as a burden, not as a relic, but as someone who mattered. And that, more than anything, was the victory I had been waiting for. Later that night, as I washed the dishes alone in my kitchen, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. My face was lined, my hair grayer than ever, but my eyes were bright. Because I finally knew, power isn't about shouting. It's about standing your ground even when everyone expects you to stay silent. And as I dried my hands, I smiled to myself, grateful that life had given me this moment not of revenge, but of quiet, undeniable triumph. Not long after that dinner, word spread quickly around town about Ashley's boutique shutting down. People who once admired her flashy lifestyle now whispered about how everything had come crashing down. I went about my life as usual, grocery shopping, volunteering at the community center, tutoring the neighbors' kids. But something had changed in how people looked at me. Those who had seen Ashley belittle me in public now treated me with a quiet respect. One day, Mrs. Dawkins pulled me aside after our morning walk. "Celeste, you know, I've always admired how you handle yourself. You never shouted, never made a scene. And yet, somehow you've shown everyone exactly who you are." I smiled gently. "Sometimes the loudest voice is silence, Margaret. People reveal who they are eventually." A few days later, Ashley approached me at the community center. Her posture was different. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "Celeste," she said, "I wanted you to know I've started working at the library. It's part-time, but it feels good to actually earn something myself." I studied her for a moment. It wasn't easy for her to say that. "That's good, Ashley," I replied kindly. "Earning your own way always feels better than pretending." She gave a small, genuine smile. "I get that now. More than ever." For a moment, we stood there in silence. It wasn't awkward, just honest. That evening, Mark called me. "Mom, Ashley and I have been talking a lot lately," he said. "About you. About how much you've done for this family. We never really appreciated it before, but we do now." There was a pause before he added, "I'm ashamed of how I stayed quiet all those years. I let Ashley treat you like you didn't matter. I can't take that back. But I want you to know, I'll never let it happen again." Tears stung my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, Mark. That means more to me than you realize." The next Sunday, I invited the whole family for lunch. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different. Ashley helped in the kitchen without being asked, setting the table, even asking me about some of my old recipes. As we ate, the conversation was warm, genuine, free of the tension that used to linger in every interaction. At one point, Ashley looked at me across the table. "Celeste, you didn't just help us financially. You taught me something I'll never forget, that real power isn't about appearances. It's about integrity. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be better." I held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Actions, Ashley. They always speak louder than words." Later that afternoon, after everyone left, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the yard. I thought of Thomas, wondering what he would say if he could see me now. I imagined his kind eyes and the small, proud smile he always gave me when I surprised him with my strength. "You'd be proud, wouldn't you, Thomas?" I whispered to the quiet air. Because this wasn't just about proving Ashley wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had never been powerless, only underestimated. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something profound. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant holding someone accountable while still choosing grace over vengeance. And maybe that was the greatest power of all. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a quiet rhythm. Ashley and Mark began repaying the loan, just as we agreed, sending me a small portion every month. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the act of accountability. Each payment felt like a step toward rebuilding respect brick by brick. Ashley kept her word about changing too. She started living more modestly, sold off several expensive handbags and jewelry pieces, and even joined a financial literacy class at the library where she now worked. One afternoon, she invited me to attend the class with her, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. "Celeste," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "I think people could learn a lot from you. You've been through so much, and you've always made smart choices. Please, would you come talk about how you built your savings and investments?" At first I hesitated, but then I thought of all the women who might be sitting in that room believing they were powerless, just as I had once believed. "All right," I said finally, "I'll do it." When the day came, I stood in front of a small group of women of all ages. My hands trembled slightly as I began speaking, but soon my voice steadied. "I was a baker for 30 years, I told them. I didn't make much at first, but I saved every bit I could. I invested carefully even when people laughed at me for being too cautious. And when life knocked me down, I didn't give up. I adapted." I looked around the room, seeing the attentive faces staring back at me. "People will underestimate you," I continued. "They'll call you old, useless, weak. But your worth isn't defined by their words. It's defined by the choices you make every single day. Quiet strength is still strength." When I finished, the room erupted in warm applause. Ashley stood at the back, clapping the loudest, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in her before: genuine admiration. Afterwards, she approached me. "Celeste, you're incredible. I can't believe I spent so many years not seeing who you truly are." I gave her a small smile. Sometimes people need to lose what they think matters before they realize what truly does. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You're right. And I'll never forget what you did for me, even when I didn't deserve it." That evening, Mark stopped by to help me with some repairs around the house. We ended up sitting on the porch as the sun went down, sipping sweet tea like we used to when he was a boy. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "Ashley told me today that you're her role model now. I think she finally understands." I chuckled softly. "Let's hope she remembers that lesson." Mark smiled. "She will. And I promise I won't stay silent anymore. You'll always have my respect, Mom. Always." As night fell, I went inside and sat at my desk with my journal. "Thomas," I wrote, "I think you'd be proud. Not because I put Ashley in her place, but because I finally remembered my own strength. I didn't need to yell or fight. I just needed to stand my ground, and in the end, that was enough." I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction. For so many years, I had carried the weight of being underestimated. But now I realized something powerful. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned through quiet resilience, steady actions, and never forgetting your own worth. And that, I thought with a smile, was the kind of power that could never be taken away. Spring arrived slowly that year, the cold finally giving way to the first blossoms in my garden. I spent my mornings tending to the roses Thomas had planted decades ago. It felt peaceful, like life was settling into a balance I hadn't known for a long time. One Saturday, Ashley appeared at my door carrying a tray of muffins. She looked almost shy. "I tried one of your old recipes," she said with a small smile. "Thought I'd bring some over." I took the tray, surprised. "Thank you, Ashley. They look lovely." She hesitated. I wanted to talk to you." "Really talk? We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had once stood tall and arrogant. But now she seemed smaller, more human. "I've been thinking a lot about who I used to be," she said, her voice quiet. I was so wrapped up in appearances, wanting people to think I had it all. But the truth is, I didn't. I was terrified of failing, so I lashed out at others to make myself feel superior. I studied her face. She wasn't making excuses, she was confessing. "You hurt me deeply, Ashley," I said softly. I know she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "And I'm so sorry. I can never take back the things I said. But I want to be better. Not just for Mark, for myself too." There was a long pause before I spoke. Change takes time, but words mean nothing without action. "You've started proving yourself. Keep going." She nodded firmly. "I will." A few weeks later, Ashley invited me to the library where she now worked. They were hosting a small community event. Nothing glamorous, just people sharing stories and advice about rebuilding their lives after setbacks. To my surprise, Ashley stood up to speak. "Most of you know me," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I used to think success was about appearances, about cars, clothes, and what other people thought of me. I judged others harshly, even those who had done more for me than I could ever repay." She glanced at me in the crowd. "But someone I deeply wronged gave me a second chance. Not by shouting at me or punishing me, but by showing me what real strength looks like, quiet, steady, and unshakable." The room was silent as she finished. "That person is Celeste," she said, her voice cracking. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the kindness she showed me." When it was over, people came up to thank me, to shake my hand, to tell me how inspired they felt. But I didn't need their praise. Because as Ashley stood there wiping her eyes but smiling, genuinely smiling, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't when the world applauds you. It's when the person who once mocked you finally understands who you are and who they could be if they chose better. That night, Mark called me. "Mom," he said, his voice warm, "Ashley told me everything she said today. I think she's really changed." "I believe she has," I replied softly. Mark hesitated before adding, "Thank you for never giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve it." I looked out at the roses blooming under the moonlight and felt Thomas's presence somehow. Maybe this was what he meant all along. Strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how steady you stand. And now finally the people around me understood that too. By summer, life felt entirely different. Ashley had taken on a second part-time job and was sticking to a strict budget. She had even started helping at the community center's weekly food drive, working quietly without expecting praise. One morning, while we packed boxes of canned goods together, she looked at me and said, "You know, Celeste, this feels better than any fancy party ever did." I smiled. "Helping others always feels better than impressing them." She nodded, thoughtful. A few days later, Mark invited me over for dinner. It had been years since they hosted me without tension hanging in the air. When I arrived, Ashley greeted me warmly, ushering me to the table she had set with care. During dinner, Ashley reached for my hand. "Celeste, I know I've apologized before, but I want to say it again, thank you. You didn't just help us financially. You gave me a chance to see the person I had become, and I didn't like her." Her eyes glistened with tears. "I used to think you were weak because you stayed quiet," she continued. "But I've learned that silence can be stronger than shouting. You didn't need to humiliate me or punish me. Life did that on its own. And you just stood there steady and let me learn the lesson I deserved." Mark squeezed my other hand. "Mom, you've changed both of us. More than you know." For a moment, I felt tears welling in my own eyes. I had waited so long not for an apology, but for understanding. That weekend, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I hosted a small gathering at my house. I invited neighbors, old friends, even some of the women from the library. Ashley came early to help set up, bustling around the kitchen with genuine joy. "I can't believe how nervous I am," she laughed. "I want everything to be perfect for you." I chuckled. "Relax, Ashley. People aren't coming for the food. They're coming for the company." That evening, as everyone gathered in my garden, I looked around at the laughter, the warm glow of the lights strung through the trees, the faces of people I loved. And then I saw Ashley carrying trays, chatting kindly with neighbors, no longer trying to impress anyone. She caught my eye and gave me a small, sincere smile. At that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me proving my worth. It was about her finally discovering her own. When the night wound down, Ashley and I sat on the porch steps listening to the cicadas. "You know," she said softly, "if you had just yelled at me that night, if you'd thrown my words back at me, I don't think I'd ever have learned. I would have just gotten defensive. But you didn't. You stayed calm. You made me face myself." I looked at her for a long moment. Sometimes Ashley's silence is the loudest teacher. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. As I lay in bed that night, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I had spent so much of my life being underestimated. But in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding myself and those around me that real strength is quiet, steady, and unshakable. And finally, they all knew it too. The summer nights grew longer, and life finally felt whole. I found myself laughing more, sleeping better, and enjoying the simple routines I had always loved: morning walks, evenings in the garden, quiet afternoons reading by the window. One evening, Mark and Ashley came over for dinner. They brought dessert, Ashley's homemade pie made from scratch. She was proud, but not in the old way. "This is the first time I baked a pie without burning the crust," she joked, setting it on the table. I laughed. "Then tonight is already a success." After dinner, Mark stayed behind while Ashley washed dishes in the kitchen. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy, soft, full of gratitude. "Mom," he said quietly, "you've always been stronger than anyone I've ever known. I used to think you were just steady, but now I know you're the reason I have the life I do. You built everything from nothing, and I let Ashley make you feel small." His voice wavered. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you long before now." I placed my hand on his. "What matters is that you see it now, Mark. We can't change the past, but we can be better moving forward." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I promise I will be. For you." When Ashley returned, she sat beside me, drying her hands on a towel. "Celeste," she said softly, "I know I can never undo the way I treated you, but I want you to know I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed. Not because I owe you money, but because I finally understand what respect really is." For a long moment, I didn't speak. I just looked at her, at the woman who had once mocked me, dismissed me, treated me as if I didn't matter. Now she was someone different. "You're learning, Ashley," I said gently. And that's all I ever wanted. Weeks later, the final loan payment arrived. A neat cashier's check delivered with a handwritten note. "Celeste, thank you for believing in me even when I didn't deserve it. You didn't just save us financially, you saved me from myself. I'll never forget what you've done for me. With gratitude, Ashley." I placed the note in my journal, pressing it flat between the pages. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I sat on my porch, watching the leaves tumble across the yard. My house felt quieter these days, but not lonely. Peaceful, settled, full of the life I had built with my own two hands. As I sipped my tea, I thought of Thomas. "You'd laugh if you saw all this," I murmured to the breeze. "But you'd be proud too." Because I finally remembered that I was never powerless. I just needed to stop letting people forget who I was. To anyone else, my story might seem small, just an old woman standing her ground. But for me, it was everything, because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet strength of saying no, of drawing boundaries, of refusing to let someone else decide your worth. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I smiled to myself. I wasn't old and useless. I was steady. I was strong. And I had finally reminded the world of that truth. If you've ever been underestimated, tell me your story. Share where you're from, what you've endured, and how you found your strength. Let's remind the world that quiet power is still power.